I want to like, I'm trying to like search for like a line that's like both funny, like a non-divisive, funny line from this movie, but also one that doesn't necessarily speak to like our current woes.
Like, blessed are the cheesemakers.
Oh, clearly it refers to any manufacturer of dairy products. Hello, and welcome to Movies We Dig, the podcast about antiquity, film, and everything in between. I'm Colin McCormick.
And I'm Elijah Fleming.
Today we'll be talking about Life of Brian, the 1979 British comedy set in Roman Judea, written by and starring the members of Monty Python. I think also I just had this thing in my voice where like I tend to drop at the end of sentences, like I kind of ramble off and go down, and then it makes it like I hear it in the editing room. I'm like, God, stop doing that, Colin. But yeah, okay.
Your own voice.
Oh, it's the worst. You hear all the ticks and all the ums, all the butts, all the time you like smack your lips together. Like 90% of editing these things is just like taking out the like and like that kind of stuff. But yeah, let's. I have like some. I have a lot of thoughts on this movie, and I think a lot of people have had a lot of thoughts about this movie in the past 40 years.
For sure.
It just had its 40th anniversary like last year, something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, before we get into that, Eli, as we usual, do you dig this movie, and how did you uncover it?
I do dig this movie. I think this movie is hilarious and surprising, and sort of every time I watch it, I find new things that make me laugh, or that make me think about things. And I don't think I appreciated it when I first saw it. I think I watched it in high school because like everybody was really into Monty Python in high school, right? It was like Holy Grail was the funny, like weird hipster thing that you would watch and quote. And I remember watching Life of Brian and being like, I guess it was okay. It was kind of boring, but every time that I have watched it since, I appreciate it more.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. I dig this movie. I think it is hilarious. I still a lot of the jokes, I think, like you said, it's remained strangely current in a way that not a lot like, and we were talking about, particularly with like Funny Thing Happened to the Way of the Forum, like had the tendency that a lot of comedy tends to get dated really quick. Yeah. And that's not to say that there aren't parts of this movie that have maybe aged a little weird or have aged. Yeah, there's like a few, but it's I would say it's a sort of handful, and I think this movie is smart enough that there's always like a little bit of it's not necessarily just as simple as like kind of crude or punching down all the time. But yeah, I'm trying to think about when I first, because I was trying to remember the other day when I first saw this movie, and it was, I can't actually remember, because like you said, it must have been, I saw Holy Grail. That was like my first exposure to Monty Python. Probably about the same age as you. Like I would say like middle school, high school, something like that.
For sure.
Loved it. Thought it was hilarious. I remember Life of Brian had a kind of a weird stigma, because I was actually just talking to my mom earlier today, and she was like, I never liked that movie. And tellingly, my mom of members of my family was the most religiously inclined. She grew up in sort of a Portuguese Catholic family, and so that movie, I mean, that we can talk about. This movie has a big stigma on it among that it's sort of been dealing with, and then I think we want to get into is I think like the religious element sort of overshadows a lot of other elements and critiques that this movie has and is making, and I think it sort of blows out of proportion, because this movie isn't necessarily just a religious criticism, and we're going to talk about that, but I really want to also kind of shy away from that, because I think that's been tread over and over again in interviews and think pieces and stuff. So we'll touch on it, but I really want to get to kind of the other non-religious aspects of this movie that I think are super interesting.
Yeah.
But but even like to continue my sort of story is I don't really remember when I saw this film for the first time, but I must have been young enough, because I remember being a little bit startled, maybe for lack of a better word, with full frontal nudity of both men and women. And that definitely like took me by surprise in a way that like I was like
oh, okay.
So I must have been young enough that like that would have been like I was like, should I be watching this?
Yeah, exactly.
So, which in my mind would have made me I probably must have been something like 14 to 16 or something like in that range.
Mm-hmm.
But I think now I would say this is my favorite of the Monty Python films, I think, today, for a couple of reasons. One, because it kind of it sort of goes where we live, like there's sort of professional overlap. But I think it's kind of I want to say the smartest. Like Holy Grail is a sort of glib take on Arthur and Arthurian legend, and it kind of like it's just kind of making fun of like the austerity or the epic or the sort of romance, the Arthur romance and that kind of thing, like Britain's mythic history.
Right.
Because I just revisited because I was thinking, I had Monty Python on the brain. I was thinking of the scene where the peasants and Arthur is like, like I was gifted the sword by the Lady of the Lake when she arose to me clad in the finest samite, and like extended and thus signified that by divine right I am your king. And they're like, well, I didn't vote for you. And then like the whole like the irreverency for like medieval legend and that. And the idea, so just like a little sort of, I guess, background maybe before we get into this is the troupe had the sort of great success with the Holy Grail.
And the Flying Circus.
Yes, and obviously before that, the Flying Circus, sort of sketch comedy, all those scenarios.
And I would argue that like Holy Grail really pulls a lot more from sketch and like little vignettes than any sort of overarching narrative.
Yes.
And that's maybe where I like Life of Brian more now, because it is one story, kind of. Like there are little pieces that become those little vignettes, but it is a narrative.
Yeah, that's the like, I was literally just about to go there because like, these guys sort of originate from sort of brief sketch comedy, and Holy Grail plays like that. Like it's sort of a series of more or less independent things. Like you could really put all of the different scenes in Holy Grail in any order, and it doesn't really matter. Like there's an overarching narrative of finding the Grail, but it's kind of whatever. And like even like the film itself kind of acknowledges this because it has this sort of narrative breakdown like towards the end where like I think they themselves were uncertain of how to end the film, so they're just like, and I think they went over budget and they're just like, we can't have, like there maybe was going to be some huge battle or something like that, and then they're just like, we can't do that and we don't know how to end it, so the cops show up and just like tear the set. And like that's I forget what that is in theater, but that's like a trope in sort of like particularly stage production where you end the play by just like all the crew and stagehands and stuff come out and just literally tear the set down right in front of you. But yeah, I think that's one of the reasons I like whole Life of Brian more, because it does have a narrative through line. Granted, there's a lot of like independent scenes, and I was watching an interview with I think John Cleese, who was talking about like the mentality. First of all, like the way this film got written sounds kind of like these guys they were living the life, because so they had this idea to like, oh well, like we kind of want to mock, and I think the sort of the story, so as they told, like Eric Idle I think tells it, or maybe Michael Palin, but he says like somebody asked us what we were going to do next, and then they said like Jesus Christ, lust for glory or something like that. And then they're like, well, what if we did like like the same kind of approach we took with Arthur, and we just did it with sort of life and times of Jesus. And so they went to they kind of separated, and they convened, and I think they convened in I think Barbados for like 2 weeks.
Oh my gosh.
And basically hammered out the script. It was described as like script writing and water skiing.
That's the life.
Right? I know. I want to like write scripts and go water skiing. I mean, I guess for academics we kind of do that, but these days it's
these days it's not as fun.
it's like dissertation writing or it's like dissertation writing and Netflix. Or
that's about it.
For me, it's job applications and Nintendo Switch. They kind of came to the conclusion that like Jesus himself is like not very funny. Like there's not really a lot to.
Yeah, they couldn't do much with that.
Can't lampoon without just kind of being a dicks, for lack of a better word. Because there's like, you're gonna make fun of a guy for like telling you to be nice to the poor. Like
it's like, what are you supposed to do with that?
Yeah, exactly. So then like the idea sort of emerged of like that it's kind of almost a very sort of Stoppard-esque. It's like around in between. Like his life is there as a framework, but it's really about this other character, Brian, who was maybe originally he was like 13th apostle or something like that, or like this guy who's like on the fringe of the foundation of sort of the one of the world's biggest religions today, and just kind of like operating in the background.
He was the stable like 2 doors down or something. He was
Mhm.
born in the
Yeah,
same
and
night.
but I think the talking point I was taking the very circuitous way. Like I stopped over at Brian's manger to
Yeah.
give all the wrong gifts over to the
Right.
wrong baby. And I'm just when I think about the scene, I just think of like the jokes are coming. So like, so what is he then? He's like a Capricorn. What are they like? He's like, well, he's the son of God. It's like, oh, is that all Capricorns? He's like, no, just him.
No, it's great.
But
It's
yeah,
gold.
that's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But the idea that this movie is coming on, well, I guess maybe it's at least a decade after the sort of high point of like Hollywood sort of epic sword and sandal, either sort of classical and or biblical films. Like like Ben-Hur is the one that jumped to mind, but there's other ones like Ten Commandments and Quo Vadis, where it's like it's the same deal where you have characters that are sort of in the life and times of Jesus Christ, and then maybe like I think of Ben-Hur, he like encounters Jesus and Jesus like gives him water, and then he has this like reverence, and those movies are 100%, like we kind of always say, movies about the past really are saying more about their present.
For sure.
And I think this movie like 100% gets that.
Yes.
But because those films I think are really playing into a sort of mid-century conservative Cold War era. I think there is no accident that the religious element of these films is drummed up when we're juxtaposing ourselves against the supposedly godless commies.
For sure. Yeah.
And so it's kind of riffing off that, like kind of like sort of the reverential aspect of those films. But then in one interview I was watching, I spent basically my morning watching interviews of John Cleese and Michael Palin and Eric Idle, but he was saying that this has kind of always been a thing in Monty Python's comedy, to just take historical settings and just put, for them, modern British, like contemporary British people, just plug them into that setting. So you've got, the Arthurian England, but they're like, well, I didn't vote for you, or like, or like the Sermon on the Mount happens at about tea time,
right?
Yeah, and just inserting these like modern British voices into some sort of historical setting, and then like that's a lot of comedy, and that's in Flying Circus too. Like you see it everywhere.
Yeah. So is that then all like the factionalism that they make fun of with like the Judean People's Front and the People's Front of Judea? It's like all of these factionalist politics in like contemporary British politics was certainly dramatic at that time. Nitpicky
like
ideologies. That's funny.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, I think that's one of the elements that often gets sort of overlooked in this film, like, because this film takes a lot of swipes at a lot of people, and everybody tends to dwell on the Christian issue, but like I think they're really like one of the main groups in their crosshairs is kind of far left, sort of different sort of political organizations. The way it's like like you said, like the People's Front of Judea versus the Judean People's Front, and they're all just, all the other ones are splitters, and they just can't, like, no one can, which is, I mean, something that I think is also is happening, I think, in contemporary America as we're recording this, of just sort of progressive and left-leaning groups who like are having a real hard time really kind of converging and like and standing up to, say, like maybe an oppressive fascistic regime, but let's not seek too many parallels there.
That's fine. It's just a little too close to home.
We're gonna try and walk that line respectfully and tastefully. But on the point, I had one sort of point in another sort of more recent comparison to bring, because I was thinking about this film, thinking about the triangulation of Life of Brian and the sort of movies like Ben-Hur, where Life of Brian is sort of the Spaceballs of Ben-Hur, for lack of a better comparison. Then there's like a movie like, I don't know, did you ever see Hail Caesar, the Coen Brothers film?
I did not.
Oh, it's great. I mean, I really like the Coen Brothers films, even the like, I really like going into, they have a very, people have accused them of being misanthropic, of having like a pretty like dismal view of people generally.
Right.
Maybe. And like there's also films like, I think if you really want to like get into the Coen Brother headspace, you watch A Serious Man. Do you know that one?
No.
It's like it's kind of like a modern Job, but it's like it's sort of based on their life growing up in like Minnesota, I think, in the 60s, or Michigan. No, I think it's Michigan.
Okay.
And it's like growing up basically a Jewish community in Michigan, and this guy's life basically falls apart, and he like seeks answers, and he's like confronted with like nothing, and like everything just kind of goes to hell around him.
Sounds depressing. I don't think I need that right now.
Yeah, it's if you find that kind of humor funny, it's. But anyways, the point I'm getting to is in Hail Caesar is like set while like the backdrop of that film is they're filming like a Ben-Hur type movie, and there's a part at the very end of the movie where George Clooney, who's the actor playing the sort of like Charlton Heston type, like big leading man, and like it's like a Roman soldier who like encounters Christ and has a religious awakening and like suddenly is like brought towards the truth, and he gives this like big long speech about like seeing light and truth and like like having like a basically an epiphany. And then as he's giving the speech and like the movie is cutting away to like the sort of like crew and all the cast are kind of like, you can see that like they're kind of cut, like they're sort of falling in with the speech, and like he's like having this moment, and then he blanks on the very last word of his monologue, which is he's like we just need to find, and then like the director's like, faith, you need to find faith. And he like blanks on the last word, and then he's like, I get it. And then they just kind of like the whole like the patine or whatever it like drops away,
everything crumbles.
Yeah, and it's like that's I think a similar movie, just in the sense that it has the mind space of the kind of like unironically or like overly sincere biblical-esque Roman classical storytelling, and then kind of sort of maybe not tearing it down necessarily, but like sort of poking holes in the like tarnishing the facade. It also has a great song and dance number by Channing Tatum, who plays he's like a communist musical theater actor. I'll just make a plug. We're gonna have to talk about that movie, I think, at one point. I think we should. It's fun. It's not really about the past, but it's about the way modernity. It's among other things. It's about classic Hollywood, but ancient Rome factors in.
Okay.
But yeah, so I like totally went on a huge rant. There's also a great scene in that movie that I watched like 4 times today where Josh Brolin's kind of like he's the fixer. He's like this Eddie Mannix character. He's like this classic Hollywood sort of fixer, basically, for lack of a better word. And he brings in all like a rabbi and like a Catholic priest and a Protestant priest and like an Orthodox priest to like make sure that the script for the movie is like above board and isn't going to offend anyone.
Oh my God.
And then like it just like the first note that he gets back is one of the priests goes like, well, I thought the part where he jumps from the moving chariot was a little unrealistic. And he's just like, well, all right, noted. But like, let's talk about
the religion.
Yeah. Like what about the Jesus stuff? And then like the rabbi, like, because it's a Coen Brothers movie, the rabbi has a lot of really like kind of hot, like biting takes.
Oh yeah.
It's a great scene. You should just watch it independently. But yeah, so yeah, do you want to start with the blasphemy thing, or should we end, or just get that out of the way?
Yeah, we can get that out of the way. I think that's actually a really interesting thing to like read about them writing the movie, because it seems like they have all had conversations about what they think like the tone of the movie is and like what it means to them, and how it's not blasphemy because they're not like attacking people's actual belief, but it's heresy because they're attacking like the dogma of what these people put their faith in, which I think is so smart. And it was like a joy to go read about their arguments about the movie. It just kind of made me want to watch the movie again.
I agree. I think that is like where that's the fine line that the movie, I think, navigates. That like, so like a lot of like people that criticize the film generally, and this was, I think, like this was the argument that I heard from my mother, I remember. But when they criticize the film, they say it's because it's making fun of Jesus. Or
it does not.
God, which and like they say it doesn't. And there's an interview it's about maybe an hour long, maybe a little shorter. You can find it on YouTube, but there's a 1979 interview with them basically having an argument, and they have across from an English bishop and
Yeah.
he's like a journalist, but basically two like very old conservative guys
Yeah.
who say that it's like you're making fun of Jesus, and like they get really fixated, particularly on the crucifixion scene at the end and kind of the Sermon on the Mount. Because I mean, one of the things like I think before I even I thought I heard that this movie sort of mocks Christ or whatever, and then when I saw it, I was like, does it?
Yeah.
Because he's barely in it and he doesn't really do anything, and it's all about the people sort of around him.
Exactly. Yeah.
And like sort of my sort of working theory is, and I think they would say that like the movie is making fun of the sort of dogmatic followers of organized religion, or the thesis of the movie is probably in that scene where Brian has to address the crowd, and he goes, "You have to think for yourselves. You're all individuals." Like I think if ever there was a thesis statement in a film, it's that.
They all chorus back, "We are individuals."
Exactly. And like I think its critics often, I think they do a conflation of like, if you're criticized, because I think the movie is criticizing like those kinds of people.
Yes.
And they're gonna be like, well, if the movie is criticizing me, ergo it's criticizing Jesus,
Right.
or my religion, or what, or God or whatever. Which I think there's a logical fallacy there.
Yeah.
But yeah, like exactly. They sort of describe the movie as mocking sort of people who like the whole sequence where he sort of accrues the followers and they sort of take little.
Yeah, bring that up, because that has stood out to me this past viewing like more than it has before, and how just like the mob following him is immediately like drawn into two different factions of like one. Does one have like his shoe or something?
Yeah, the gourd and the shoe. Those are the two. That's the great schism of this religion. It's not about whether the Trinity is one or three discrete parts, or whether or not priests should, you can pay a priest to absolve you, or what are the other sort of big schisms, and what are the Donatists about? I don't even remember.
I don't know.
I think the Arian Christians, they were the ones about the. They were whether Christ is God is the same as God, or God or of the same stuff as God. Yeah. Very little context. Yeah, very famously, there's a passage in Greek in the New Testament where there's basically there's the question of whether there's a letter I in the word, and whether I think it's Christ, whether he's homoios as God, which is like the same as God, or whether he's homos, or like the homos is like he's the same as God, like indistinguishable, and homoios whether he's like of the same sort.
Right. Yeah.
And that has led to
huge debates.
Yeah, whole different branches of Christianity that have come and gone. And anyways.
But yeah, the shoe and the gourd, really stood out to me.
And not to, again, we are recording, just for context for our listeners, we are recording this on January 16th, 2021. A time when nothing has been happening in the news. No. So I don't want to necessarily read too far into a crowd of followers who sort of take snippets of their prophet's word and then factionalize and then sort of run with their own interpretations of it.
Yep.
Again, yeah, no parallels there.
None at all.
But yeah, like they, and like just to the point where they're like putting words, the bit where they're like he is the Messiah. He's like, I'm not the Messiah. And like, only the true Messiah would deny his divinity. And he goes, okay, then I am the Messiah. And they're like, there, he admits it. And like, just that kind of like the sort of like coaxing or massaging of reality into your own ideological framework is what this is. I think the core tenet, or the core sort of critique of this movie.
Yes, for sure.
Because this movie famously was accused of blasphemy, and this, I mean, I think today, like, blasphemy is not necessarily a thing that we audiences in 2021 necessarily doesn't have as much sort of significance as I think it did in, say, Britain in the 70s.
Yeah.
We also, the United States, this movie I think was aired first in the United States because we didn't have any blasphemy laws like in England.
And wasn't it banned in Sweden, or banned in Norway?
Yeah, it was banned in Ireland, Norway, and Italy, and 39 British councils either banned it or gave it an X certificate. And that is a quote from Michael Palin. Yes, it was. I mean, the best story to come out of that is, of course, once Norway bans it, Sweden next door starts advertising it as the movie that was too funny for Norway,
which I love.
So I think that's pretty fun. Yeah. That's good.
Well, I feel like it must have given it like some like good publicity out of like being so scandalous, because I feel like any movie that's supposed to be too incendiary or too inflammatory, it's like, I don't know, some people are always going to want to see that.
Yeah, and then I mean, that was, I feel like, the allure of, say, the Da Vinci Code, which I think
Oh,
has
sure. Yeah.
only has not an iota of the kind of
No.
wit of this movie or cleverness.
Agreed.
And yeah, because the
Oh, people took that way too seriously.
I read the Da Vinci Code, I think, expressly because was
Same.
Pope Benedict. Yeah, Pope Benedict was like, this book is heresy, and then the minute that, I mean, for me, I'm like, well, like, I want to see what the heresy's all about.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is what people are getting worked up about.
Exactly. Yeah.
This
Really?
fiction crime drama where somebody discovers and it's not even like Dan Brown was really making up a lot of. I mean, like, he was making up a lot of stuff. That's not actually. Never mind.
That's a whole nother like road that we don't have to go down.
I have no hot takes really on Dan Brown, other than that he's done great for the tourism industry in Italy, in
That's
Rome,
true.
and Paris.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had a quote that I found from Michael Palin in one of his. I think it was an article. It was an article that he wrote in The Guardian where he said, "I was very proud that we achieved that much of a reaction. They were the people we were after, those who blindly follow religious dictas and don't think for themselves." So yeah, I think I don't really have much more to say on the sort of religious bent, other than that I think the people that get upset and accuse this movie of blasphemy are the exact people that this movie is kind of mocking. And my personal take is that they sort of are just, there's a sort of narcissism in that kind of view, because they're saying criticism of me is criticism of Jesus, and I can't see the distinguishing between the two, which is sort of just feeding in. There's a lack of irony, and again, like, people not realizing their own irony or hypocrisy. No modern parallels.
Yep.
That's all I got.
Yep. Nope. Good with that.
All right. So let's get into what I really wanted to talk about with this movie, which is basically the way this movie depicts ancient Rome. And like Rome and just like life in Roman Judea in 30 something AD.
Yep.
Because like I was sort of saying I remember the point I was going to say earlier about the writing process of this movie that didn't make it, but that basically just like we were talking about the skit nature, that like the way they describe writing this movie is like basically thinking of a bunch of different skits and then tying it to sort of together with a kind of narrative and like trying to connect the dots and see where everything lines up. But anyways, this movie was filmed in Tunisia, which apparently a lot of movies at the time it was Tunisia, because they didn't want to film it in Catholic countries. Like, they were considering Spain and somewhere else, or the Middle East for other sort of issues. And so they literally sort of glommed onto the set of an Italian film that had just been shot in Monastir, Tunisia, for Franco Zeffirelli's Jesus of Nazareth, which came out 2 years prior.
Well, I mean, it works pretty well.
I don't know. Yeah, how do you like the Roman Jerusalem?
I mean, seems legit enough for their purposes, I guess. It's kind of, like a dirty old city, which is what we sort of expect a lot of dirty old cities look like. Like, Rome was probably gross and crumbly and smelly, and same. So, decent.
They kind of moved in. I think just reading sort of notes on this film so Terry Jones directed this, but Terry Gilliam was kind of the sort of look designer, for lack of a better word, getting the sort of look and feel of this movie. But yeah, it has, I guess really it's like, I think one of their interviews, like, it feels authentic enough to be like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
Because also it's really like the touch point, I think, is not even so much like a historical Roman province or whatever, but really like the movies 20 years prior or 10 years prior that were, like, they have that kind of, and you see this in Hail Caesar too, like there's a kind of particular costume of, like a Roman soldier in a movie like that. They've got like, there's like a just particular look, and you can kind of tell like their armor and helmets and stuff are like kind of plastic, or like,
and they kind of bend when they walk.
Yeah, they're like aluminum. Kind of like in the film Immortals, same thing.
Oh my god, that was so bad.
Yeah, but there's just floppy helmets and swords that kind of wiggle.
Yeah, exactly.
When you shake them.
But they kind of lean into that, like the campiness of it, which especially for just like the tone of the movie, I think works very well.
Yeah. So like because it is sort of like it's silly. But we were sort of saying how like Monty Python's sort of approach to a sort of period piece is just to insert a 1970s British people into that and like milk it for the comedy. And I think that really works. And I think like my impression is like their vision of the Roman world is basically like their how did I phrase this? Rome it's like their Rome is Rome as it would have been experienced by a sort of British schoolboy in like mid-century England, mid 20th century English.
Yes.
Which because there's like probably in our field there are two scenes that sort of shine out the most, and it is 100% the way you would probably have experienced the classics if you went to like a preparatory school in England in say the 50s or something like that.
Yep. It's just great. It makes me smile every time, the graffiti scene.
Yeah, when he goes and gets I think every Latin teachers have been showing this scene to their classes for probably 40 years now.
Years and years and years.
Yeah, and I have it probably memorized. You know, I was like, Romanes eunt domus, and like people call Romans they go house.
It says Romans go home.
Yeah, it's just the idea of like what case should Roman like what's the nominative plural of Romans and like but goes in orders. Yeah, I did this I was teaching a Greek class one summer, and they just had the class had they would miss imperative verbs sort of, it's just something that would trip them up kind of frequently. And I kind of like, but go was in order, so you have to use the imperative, like the way he like squeaks it. He's like imperative.
So good. Yeah.
I think about that constantly. Yeah.
No, I always use it if I ever have to teach the locative case. Because it's like domus is one of the few words that uses a locative. And so it's like it's like locative, these like little shrieking voice. And now write it 500 times or whatever he says.
Yeah. And like, which is probably how
that would happen.
Yeah. If I think we as a field have moved away from the style of learning Latin, but there was a time and a place where you learned Latin by just sitting in a room with 12 other British school children or something, and somebody would just kind of be up there at the board just being like puella, 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 puellam, puella, and you just like remembered like charts of words.
Yep.
And recited it and wrote it down on the board like 8 billion times.
Sounds like torture.
No, I think John Cleese in particular has like in that interview, he talks about like how much he hated his like education because he thought it was like, like stifling and, just kind of, and I'm sure it was like that, like learning Latin was probably like just sort of a form of torture, just sort of remembering like patterns for lack of a better word. There are patterns in Latin, but most of us these days do not teach Latin that way.
No.
But there is like a through line, like there's like that DNA is like still there sometimes. Yep. And I think in our field, we've been having a lot of like discussions about like pedagogy of ancient languages and the form it needs to take. That's not what this podcast is about though. But yeah, like the Latin scene is kind of wonderful.
Classic.
The other I'll say two scenes. Because the other one I was thinking of is what have the Romans done for us?
Yeah.
But then, that's the scene. We should talk about that scene because that's kind of...
It's a little bit more complicated because I feel like that's... So what they're like listing all of the things that's like, we hate the Romans, they're terrible, they're awful, what have they ever done for us? And he's like, well, what about the roads? The roads are nice. It's like, oh, well, what about all of the like policing or what
the aqueduct, education, sanitation... Yeah, and wine, roads, whatever.
I don't know. It's kind of like, well, what? Like, it strikes me as a little upsetting.
Yes, well, because it's basically an apology for imperialism, which is sort of rich coming from a British context. And then when you think of it, it makes complete sense for British or like for like a British people, sort of generally to sort of
try to apologize.
Yeah, justify their own imperialism by saying this is what by constructing this narrative that like Rome comes to your, when the Romans come to your village, if you live in, Germania or Judea or Spain or Algeria or wherever the hell you are.
Yeah.
And the Romans come, and then you were living in a mud hut, and now you've got paved streets and clean water and wine and education and all that stuff, which is, how do we say this?
Bullshit.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's this very old school also like opinion of Romanization is that like when
yes.
the Romans sort of put their stamp on people and places that they suddenly become more civilized, for lack of a better term, and that we know, especially archaeologically, is just such bullshit. That's not how humans work. That's not how politics work. That's not how technology works. So there were certainly paved roads before Romans made a lot of paved roads, but there were certainly aqueducts before Romans. Romans just happened to make a lot of aqueducts as well. But yeah, no, it's
they wait, I was like, so like Rome itself, like there's this, we have this image of like the Romans, the Greeks too, and the Rome, and then later the Romans sort of coming to the field and just being like light years above everyone else. Like, they've got laws and law codes and engineering and science and whatever that other people just, didn't have, which is, like you said, like we have empirical evidence to the contrary.
Yep.
There was aqueducts and plumbing in ancient Persia, sort of advanced sort of medicine and science, like particularly in the Eastern Mediterranean, the Near East.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, the Romans themselves were sort of behind the times for much of their history.
Yeah.
I mean, you probably, but like, as I understand it, you could confirm or deny that like archaeological evidence for early Rome is very faint.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not like an early Rome person. So I don't think that's where my strengths really lie, but no, there's certainly a difference between early things we might call Roman and then Etruscans who were painting, lavish tombs and were trading with the Greeks and like had this really awesome, writing system going on. And yeah, so just to say that like everything the Romans did was better, it's just so not true. In fact, they like stole a bunch of technology from other people.
Yeah, that's much of their sort of contributions, if we can call them that, are sort of adopted or taken from sort of other cultures as they encountered them. They weren't sort of original to Rome. I mean, even the Romans themselves had this. I'm coming from my sort of background in literature, but have this sort of cultural anxiety, particularly as it pertains to Greeks, but it extends, I think, more broadly of just being like, well, like like all our art and our poetry and things like that it's still like we're behind them, like we are following them in that respect, which is like, well, they sort of pay tribute to us, so like what's going, like, should we be better at all things? Cicero has some, Cicero basically says like, well, it's easy to win against someone who wasn't fighting back. Like we just weren't trying at that stuff at the time. We were worrying about being manly men, farming and cultivating honor and virtue. So the Greeks were getting into all that other stuff, and then now we were going to catch up and we're going to be better at them at their own game. But yeah, like so this particular portrayal of Rome's impact in the world is like, I think, more influenced by British excuses for imperialism.
Yeah, but it's also just like an old school historical methodology, I guess, is the idea of Romanization is something that we have really debunked recently, I guess.
Yeah, because as my sort of outsider simplistic understanding, because once you start pulling apart the threads, like the things that are really Roman and aren't Roman is like...
There's so many gray areas that it's no.
It's probably how, if again, to get back to the British school system, is how you probably would have been taught about Rome.
I'm sure.
At the time.
Exactly. Yeah, they would see a lot of their own imperialism reflected in what they would think about Romans' imperialistic tendencies.
Yes.
So I'm sure that's exactly where that's coming from.
I'm thinking of there's a scene in Last of the Mohicans where one of the Duncan Hayward, the sort of British officer, he says like, I thought English policy was to make the world England. There's like that kind of, I mean, a couple hundred years of British sort of colonial and imperial agenda. Yeah. It's a very sort of Rudyard Kipling-esque take on international relations. But where is I going with this? The other, well, it's because we meet a few Romans
Yep.
themselves, though.
Who are
Like,
not
I guess,
portrayed terribly
no,
well.
no, it's because Pontius Pilate, most famously.
Yep.
I don't even like what the logic. I mean, I love it. I think it's hilarious,
Oh,
but the
it's so
logic was
funny.
because I guess like to come back into the round. So like if we're gonna read, this is probably maybe we're taking this like more critically than the movie really ought to be taken at. But like if we run with this analogy that like
Yeah.
say the Romans in this context are sort of British imperialists or something
Mhm.
like that. The decision to make them all have like lisps and I have a very good friend in Rome. I mean, part of it is just, I think it's just comedy for comedy. I think they just thought it would be really funny
Yeah.
to have Pontius Pilate get up and be like, woman, strike him very roughly. Uh,
It gets me every time.
yeah. Oh, no. And I think it's like crude and like dumb as it is. Like, I don't think if you said like Biggus Dickus,
It's
I don't
never
think I
not
could.
going to be funny. It's so
Yeah.
funny.
Uh, Biggest. Oh.
Yeah. So yeah, the Romans themselves are not portrayed very well at all, and like the soldiers seem really inept. Like when they knock on
They
the
just
door and they're like, "No, there's nobody in here." They're like, "Oh, all right."
there just seems to be like extreme apathy
Yeah.
where like because a lot of times it's like so like the sort of guerrilla left-wing freedom fighter groups like they have the scene where they're trying to invade and like kidnap Pilate's wife and they run into the other group. I forget who it is, like the Galilean something.
Yeah.
And and then I mean there's the joke there where there's like we should be fighting our common enemy, and they're like, yes, the People's Front of Judea, or the Judea. I forget which one it is.
I know.
It's the Judean People's Front or the People Front of Judea. One of them is just one old guy,
Yeah.
and yeah, just these like groups, and they can't. And then the Roman soldiers come in, and they're just like kind of like, what's going on? But yeah, so we meet Pontius Pilate, who's just kind of silly, and the crowd, like he addresses the crowd, and they're all just like mocking him to his face,
Yep.
like telling him to release Wajah. Um, and then his friend Biggus Dickus shows up. Who's I forget what his deal. What does what's he talk like?
Oh, I forget. It's funny though.
And like famously, that scene where I think they had the extra whoever the extras were. I don't. This may not be true, but I heard in some version that the extras were actually like military personnel or something like that they got to be on set. You know, just some like British soldier.
Yeah.
But they like that they were the extras were told explicitly like not to laugh. You know, with like Michael Palin getting in your face and being like Biggus Dickus. And you can there's like that one guy, his like face is like he's making the best face because you could tell he's like trying so hard. But there is I was thinking like I was having my sort of overly professorial moment of the scene where Brian where after when he escapes the Romans and he escapes via alien intervention. Which I think is just like if I remember somewhere that the writers literally were like, we don't know how to get him out of this situation. So like, what's the most absurd thing that could happen?
Aliens.
Yeah, he falls into an alien spaceship and then it turns into like Star Wars for 5 minutes.
And then they're right back into it.
And then he falls right exactly back in it. But the scene where he sort of lands and there's all those people in like the market or the forum or whatever it was. And they're all like sort of proselytizing, like they're all just giving all these different sort of speeches, which to my mind, like that's actually like maybe
that's probably legit.
Yeah, there's like to some point, like what not maybe the specific dogma that they're about to be not a 9-bladed sword, but like well that was the thing in the ancient world of constantly. That's what like a lot of philosopher types would do, like in Greek context, where you would go, and we have bits about this from Roman texts and other Greek words and like the Satyricon I think mentions this by Petronius of like you basically want to go and drum up, because there wasn't necessarily like a particular like an organized sort of school system necessarily, but you would go to like the market or the agora, the forum, or wherever you were, and you would basically just start like speaking on the street, and then you were trying to attract students. You're basically like giving a pitch, and then if you can get enough students, then you can sort of make some money for yourself.
Yeah.
And yeah, like we have jokes about this, about in like the Satyricon of people that do this, that they go and they basically try to like, it's almost like it's the way in that text it's sort of portrayed. It's almost like those like get rich quick schemes.
Yeah.
Now I'm talking like Pontius Pilate, get rich sort of like sort of quick scans where it's like subscribe to my program and like you're
Right.
going to be making like money. It's exactly like that.
It's
It's
like a pyramid scheme
like
or something.
yeah, no, for sure. Like in the same way that people are like, I'm thinking about there's a scene from The Simpsons where this guy like tells you how to use it, like he tells you how to get rich. He's like, you got to squeeze every penny. It's like this tuxedo I'm wearing, someone died in it. Like it's all like just these little like scams or like tricks on how to get rich. And like you would go to say a market and be like, oh, like study oratory with me and I can teach you how to argue anything. You can win every argument. You can sort of become a great public speaker and have a successful political career or whatever. But and also sort of simultaneously is particularly in sort of the eastern part of the Mediterranean, there was also a lot of just different sort of cults and religions
Yeah,
that are kind of cropping up at this time
for sure.
and a little bit later. Christianity kind of being the biggest sort of product of this era, but there were other ones like Mithras was a popular cult. Everyone loves Mithras. He's great.
Good.
It's one not to love. It's like a guy kills a bull. There's a secret initiate order.
And it's very similar to Christianity in that it has this very like good versus evil framework where it's like he's like some maybe affiliated with like a sun god or like he's the light and he has to kill the bull of night or something and
something like that. It's also, I think of it like it's kind of like Scientology where like there's all these like secret levels and like you can go to like they have there's archaeological remains of these like the church or I don't know what you call them, temples.
Temple, yeah. Mithraeum.
Where
there you go.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like there's like an order and there's all these like symbols on the floor and then you advance up. Like as you advance up, you're like initiated with more and more secrets.
So cool. That one's in Ostia, right? It's on the floor.
Yeah, I think there's one in Ravenna too.
Cool. Those are so much fun.
Later one. It's really, and there's like really cool sort of frescoes. Like, did you see? It's like I remember it's like him killing a bull, and there's also like a scorpion there. I think that helps. And maybe a dog.
Yeah,
or something
he has like
that.
A little dog that's always there, and he's wearing like what's the hat that he wears?
Oh yeah, the one I know exactly what you're talking about, but I forget what it is. We're gonna like we're again professionally embarrassing ourselves with our lack of knowledge. We took graduate comp exams. we know this stuff.
We know these.
But yeah, that it's like the one that like it's like a reverse elf hat. Yeah. Like it comes up and curves forward.
Yeah, it's awesome. It looks great.
Yeah. Sol Invictus was another one. That one I think has a lot of overlaps with Christianity.
For sure.
Isis from Egypt. Yep. That's a lot of them have sort of like themes of like they're kind of secret orders or like there's like a salvation element to them where like you join and then you're going to get some sort of secret knowledge or access to like maybe an afterlife element, key to salvation, that
or like
kind of
instructions on how to like navigate the afterlife. I'm thinking of those like little gold tablets that had like instructions written on them. We find them in sarcophagi sometimes. They're like, then walk through the door, and it's really cool.
Oh, that's wild. That's really fun.
I know.
I was thinking also I forget where this came up. Oh, I remember. I was literally talking to my Dungeons and Dragons group, and somebody brought this up. And this was these were like other just friends, not people in my field, but of like one of the first depictions of like a crucifix is like graffito in Pompeii of a guy with it's like a guy on a cross, but he's got a donkey head.
That's awesome.
And it says Alexamenos prays to his god in Greek. It says it in Greek, but I'm pretty sure I think it's in Pompeii. I'm like 90% sure it's from Pompeii.
That's cool.
I can look it up. Hang on. It's like definitely it's like some. I spelled Alexamenos wrong. Yeah, the Alexamenos graffiti, Roman graffito. Oh no! It's from the Palatine, and so it's made like I think the running interpretation that it's like some kid like it's like by some kid in like who like someone in his class maybe is like a Christian. He's just kind of like that kid with the weird religion, making fun of the kid with the weird religion. That's like what it was. School children are great.
So mean. That's great. I love that.
It's the picture is kind of hilarious.
Okay, I'm gonna look it up.
Dates, yeah, it hasn't been dated, but it runs anywhere between 1st, 3rd century, I think.
Oh my god, that's so funny.
Yeah, right?
I'm impressed with this, actually. It looks like a person with a donkey head. Like,
yeah, cultural sensitivity was not really a thing that they were trained on. Um, but yeah, there's this context of, I mean, this whole thing of just like people not really understanding, like even like I think our earliest records talking about Christians, like a lot of the people don't really like, they have a very loose grasp of like what Christians sort of are and like what they do.
Yeah.
They're just kind of like, because also like it's, you know, we have this sort of this narrative that gets like reimposed, particularly in movies like Ben-Hur and other movies that Life of Brian kind of makes fun of, like this reverence and this sort of almost like predestination that Christianity is the sort of is going to come through. And then if you were, but like, I think if you were there at the time, it may not necessarily would have jumped out. If you say we're living in, you know, Turkey or Greece or Italy or something like that in like 50 AD, you might meet Christians, but you might meet like 100 other different gods and belief systems.
Exactly.
And like, it wouldn't necessarily have jumped out to you as like
No.
later when there's sort of many Christians, but
Yes.
yeah.
I don't know where to go from here.
Oh shit, we're already at an hour.
We had so many things to say.
I mean, really, I could just quote the Latin scene like over and over and over again, and like, you know, I guess I think that just strikes a tone if you've ever taken Latin in your life, or
Yep.
It'd be like that sometimes.
It'd be like that. It's true.
Is I get my sort of the final point is kind of circling back around to just the sort of thing we started about, which is, I don't know, is this movie still controversial today? Have we moved past it? Is it controversial in new ways?
I'm sure there are still people who think that this is blasphemous, I guess, or are offended by it. But I would hope that we can mostly be a little bit more critical of our individuals.
Yes, we can be individuals. You are all individuals. Okay, and yeah, I think I don't really have I think I've like tapped out. I think most of what I think about this movie.
I still super dig this movie. I think it's great.
Yeah,
it's hilarious.
I think, you know, even like there's some little parts of it that I'm like kind of like that I find a little weird. Not every joke necessarily, but I think like by and large, I think this movie's sort of insightful satire wins out over most other aspects of the film. I mean, if anything, just for like, I mean, I think simultaneously its criticism on it's like, I think they described it like this movie is critical of dogmatic belief, whether that is of religious nature or whether you're in some sort of niche left-wing progressive group that sort of is going to squabble with all other sort of similar groups over like your particular sort of approach to whatever something is. Yeah. Oh God, sorry. I thought about one more joke that I forget about, but I think it's actually kind of a great joke.
Okay.
When that like Brian works as like a concessions boy in the arena,
oh my God,
and he's going around being like otter nipples and like like squirrel penis and like roasted like newt eyeballs or like whatever the heck you say. I think that's like and like simultaneously in the background there's that guy being chased by the gladiator. And the gladiator like has a heart attack. But yeah, just because I mean that's the thing, like well, you're sort of like the not to like put you on the spot, but like Roman food, right?
Yeah, and I mean there's this sort of I guess overarching like theme that really wealthy Romans ate like weird stuff, which usually gets boiled down to just like some of the few recipes that we do have that are for like flamingo and dormice or something.
I was reading a bit of Pliny the Elder the other day where he talks about that there's in Spain there was a delicacy of like basically like rabbit fetus.
I mean, sure.
It's the logic of it's the logic of foie gras and
exactly, yeah,
pate and like that kind of stuff, or
for sure, veal.
What's the other one? Escargot.
Yeah, so like things that are difficult to obtain or rare or whatever sort of become something that is quote unquote delicious or
even like stuff that's like hard to eat.
Yeah, it's like pull it apart or there's like little or whatever.
Or, yeah, I think like lobster or like chicken feet.
But on like the opposite end of that, sometimes the things like lobster used to be something that you gave to like servants and poor people because there just used to be so many of them and it was
Mm-hmm.
difficult to eat. And it's only when they have become more rare that they are like
Yeah.
considered the, you know.
I just read this thing today, I think, that was talking about like in France, the potato was declared edible in like 1770 something. And it was because it was like some French guy, I think it was like a French doctor, he was imprisoned by the Prussians who basically made him eat potatoes because they thought potatoes was only good for like cattle feed.
That's hilarious.
And then he was like, and then he came out of the whole thing. He's like, actually, I feel kind of fine. Like, and I think like that's true. Like if you ate mostly potatoes, you probably wouldn't be overly malnourished, right? Like don't they have most of?
Yeah, no, that's why they were such like a huge monopoly in Ireland before the Great Potato Famine is because you can actually get a decently like well-rounded nutritional profile from potato plus some other things.
Mm-hmm. I think
Um,
that somebody explained it was like potatoes plus milk, and you have all your vitamins represented because the
Pretty
only thing
much.
potatoes lack is like A and D,
Yeah.
which you can get in milk.
I do think though that like when the potato first came to like England and Europe and whatever, they didn't eat the tubers at first. They would like try to eat leaves, which are not good for you.
There's a story about this that I think it's Sir Walter Raleigh. He comes
Yeah.
back from he comes back from Virginia, and he brings like tobacco
Right.
and all this other stuff from North America, and he has like a whole potato plant,
Yep.
and he's like, oh, like the the Native Americans like this is like good to eat, and so they're going to serve it to the Queen for dinner, to Queen Elizabeth, and the chef like just assumes that it's the leaves of the edible part, not
Yep.
the tuber.
Yep.
But the potato leaves are poisonous, and so everybody at this dinner with the Queen and Walter Raleigh got like wicked food poisoning, and like just
So,
had a hell of a time. And I think Walter Raleigh it was a bit of a political fiasco for him
oh yes.
because
Oh yeah.
he was the guy that gave the Queen diarrhea.
But yeah, but I mean like in the Americas, people were eating potatoes forever and it was, you know, a huge
Mm-hmm.
source of their nutritional profile and it was awesome.
All right. I don't know how we got into the potato
I know.
train,
How
but
did we
Romans
get
did
on
not
the
have
potato train?
Romans didn't have potatoes, but they did eat fried dormice sometimes. Some Romans,
Probably, yeah.
like somebody ate it.
Somebody ate it
Um,
either out of necessity or because they thought it was fancy. Either way.
Otter nipples. And then I forget, it's like somebody asked, like, "Do you have any peanuts?" And he's like, "No." And it's like,
No.
because it's framed in the movie as like I think John Cleese. He's like, I don't want any of that imperialist trash or something like that. It's like I only have Roman food. And the Roman food is the otter
Weird.
nipples.
Yeah.
Oh, excellent. I hate the Romans. I think we should end on that. Probably that's a good note.
Awesome.
I think we're coming back next week. It looks like we're kind of pivoting into the classic. We're kind of going backwards with this. Like we're
We
sort
are,
of the
yeah.
movie that's making fun of the classic Sword and Sandals, and I think we're moving our way because we're gonna take on our first classic Sword and Sandal probably maybe next week
Mm-hmm.
or next episode in Cleopatra,
Yeah.
which I haven't seen. There's a lot of these movies I haven't seen yet.
I haven't seen. No, I've seen the big like her entrance into Rome because people
Yep.
show that to classes all the
Mhm.
time. But that's it. I'm kind of excited.
All righty.
Yeah.
In that case, I'll leave you to it.
Woo.
Yeah, we're slowly easing our way back into the show. It's been we've had a minute off for various sort of holidays and conferences and political insurrections, but yeah, we're sort of getting back into it and hope with any luck going to be producing this with some regularity.
Woo.
All right, thank you guys.
Bye guys.